Acacia wood. Okay. Bronze, but so they all. Oh, yeah, yeah. Yes. So what was prominent on the four corners? The horns. So God had them to build horns on the four corners of the altar. And this is where, and it was big, right? So this is where, when they brought the animals and all that, they sacrificed it. Now, did God have specific rules about how that looked? Yeah, he did, right? So what might those four horns speak to? Why would you think he put those on there? Yeah. Literally, so what he's starting to do is to teach us that blood covers the four corners of the earth. This is a type and a shadow of that, right? So I'll lay this out first, and then we'll walk through this. So I drew this very crude drawing of the tabernacle, but you got the altar, and they got this thing called the laver. This is where they washed themselves before they went into the holy place, and then ultimately they encountered God. One priest did, the high priest, once a year in the Holy of Holies. Now, if we see sacrifice and we see water, so we have bloodshed, we have water, which is, in our New Testament, baptism. And then we have access to the Holy of Holies because of Jesus. Do you see how this Old Testament pattern of the tabernacle was a mimic, a type, and a shadow of Christ and what we're doing today? Does this make sense? I'm kind of playing my cards before we get into it. And I thought this might be a little easier to grasp. Do you guys see this? Is it confusing? So what he was doing was teaching, and before I get there too, inside of the Holy of Holies, what was in that? What was in here? Ark of the Covenant, what was that all about? Okay. And what was underneath the mercy seat? Yep. The law, right? So, believe it or not, this is also a mimic of Eden. We can kind of see that because we've got the Minerva, the candle in here that kind of looks like the tree of life, right? And then you've also got this place where God exists, and man can actually encounter God in this place. So we're getting reflections even from the beginning in Eden. I know we've been talking about it like this on Sunday morning. And then it flashes forward, and we're starting to get some types and shadows that he's teaching the Israelites, these laws and rules. And if you think about all the laws that are here, this is the knowledge of good and evil, isn't it? So you're starting to see the tie out? There's types and shadows that tie out to Eden with the tree of knowledge, tree of good and evil. And then this is where they can encounter God. Now, there was very strict rules about how you did it. The mimic of baptism, sacrifice, and then a court, which is mimicking his kingdom. Right? Now, at the time that this was going on, do you think they understood this? No. They had no knowledge of this at all. Some prophets God might have done that with, but for the most part, they didn't really understand. They just knew that they were supposed to follow these rules. So the best way I can think about it, when we start instructing children, don't cross the street. Is there ever going to be a time in their life that, well, I'm just pick that one? How many in here have you had to yell at your children not to cross the street? Yeah, all of us, right? Now, when we think about that, what does it know? Yeah, the danger that's inherent in it. We know that, and we're trying to enforce that on them, but do you think they have a clue? You know, as I was little, I wanted to go play in the creek, and my dad was like, "No, you'll get in one of those swimming holes and drown." Now, I didn't think I would, but he had rules about all that. As I got older, I thought that was very prudent to do that, right? God's doing the same thing. He's trying to teach them something about himself, and he has to do it first by instructing things that they don't understand. They're supposed to follow these rules that he laid out without complete understanding of why. So, what does that entail? When we say there's a term that we use for children, they may not understand why they're supposed to do it, but we call that, starts with O, obedience. So during this whole process, he's teaching the Israelites obedience, right? Even if they don't understand why. Now, were there strict rules about this? Yeah. So, if the high priest went in there and did something wrong, what would happen? He would die. So they had to tie a rope on him and drag him out if he did, right? Because they weren't allowed to go in there. Yeah. So, I know. I know. I know. All right. But if he went in and he did something wrong, what happened to him? He died. So was God's judgment quick? If you touch the ark accidentally, like somebody did, what happens? Died immediately, right? All right. So, yes. Well, that's a really good point. I was good. So that's a little bit later, but let's jump into that. No, no, no. This is good to get into this. So there was a fire that burned on the altar continually. Where did that fire come from? God. And he asked them to keep it going, right? So that was one of the responsibilities of the priest is to constantly add wood and that sort of thing to the oils and things to the altar to keep it going. So what is the type and shadow for us today? What's that? Okay, so those we can think about those as incense, but I'm going to focus on because we want to get into that too. But this fire, what does this represent? It's purification. Yeah, so he's judging and purifying, right? God is. How does that happen with us today as Christians? Yes. Yes. Holy Spirit. So this constant learning and this formation that we've been talking about is this kind of growth as we're going through it, and we're getting refined as we go along. All right. So they had sacrifices. The tabernacle. Now, let me ask you this about it. So there was the temple, which Solomon built, but at this time, Moses had a tabernacle, which was, what is a tabernacle? A tent. So do you find it ironic that God met them in a tent? What do you think this is about, a tent? Why a tent? Okay. Why? Well, they're not, and was this the land they were supposed to be in? No, they were given a promised land, so they weren't building a permanent. They carried God with them. And how did he show himself over this tabernacle during their wanderings? Fire, cloud, right? So they knew he was there, and they would camp about this whole thing with them facing it. And so this was mobile. What's the type and shadow for us today about that? So think of us as being sojourners, right? Here. Now, that's kind of hard because we have houses and we have businesses and we plant ourselves firmly in our communities and all of that good thing. But how long are we going to live? Are we promised anything? Is this where we want to be forever? Aren't we looking for a promised land? So, if the tent kind of spoke to that whole thing, where is the temple today? It's us. And so, in a way, we're types and shadows of this whole thing. Does this make sense? To me, I find this fascinating because God has been working to teach who He is and how He's going to save us early on. Even when they didn't understand what He was doing, there were promises that they couldn't see, right? Spoke of promised lands and all of that. And they were thinking in terms of milk and honey and a wonderful land with all this water in it and everything. But God used that as a type and shadow of something that we have not yet seen, right? And so it's like a child. As you're growing, you learn what, at some point when you grow up, what point do you remember that, hey, this is probably a good thing not to cross the road? I need to do what? Look both ways and not get run over and all that. When that happens, does your parents have to warn you anymore? Except for Ricky? So seriously, at some point you start to see the purpose of the rule, right? But it takes maturing to do that. You with me so far? Yep. Okay. Ah, I just got locked out. So, did God have dimensions about the court, the tabernacle, the altar, all the paraphernalia that went inside of it? How to use it? When to use it? What to use it for? Why do you suppose He did that? Think He was sitting there waiting for Mr. Bill to do something wrong so He could smack his hand? Sometimes we look at this and it's like, why would God put all these heavy rules on us? If you go read through all these laws in Leviticus, there's a lot of them. But when you start to read them, it's like, okay, what is He trying to teach us? Not only in terms of, there's a great book out there called None of These Diseases. Anybody in here heard of it? Highly recommend it. It's a really good, it's kind of an old book, but what he does is he goes back and he looks at the law that was given to them, and that he just told them, if you follow this and don't follow Egypt, I'll keep you from getting the same diseases they do. Now, that was a physical thing. But what do you think he's also trying to teach us spiritually? Okay, that's good. He's a holy God, right? He's pure, and he's saying, hey, look, if you want to interact with me, here's what I expect, right? Yes.
God is a God of order. And when He set specific parameters and measurements and materials and the way that things are supposed to look, again, it's a reflection or a shadow of heaven. And you take a look at how the universe is ordered and how it all goes according to clockwork and all these kinds of things. And so we're part of His creation and we need to fit in that. And so when we're interacting with Him, we need to be orderly as well. And I think with regard to some of the other things that He's teaching, holiest of holies, for instance, he's unapproachable. That's why that veil is there. And that's why there were specific reasons or rules where one person can go in once a year under certain circumstances and conditions upon pain of death. But otherwise, He's unapproachable. And so there are things that we had to learn about God because He's setting up a relationship between specific people that's going to be representative of His relationship with humankind. And it's all being established right here.
Yeah, and very detailed, right? And what do we know about the veil? Yeah. So Christ was the perfect sacrifice that allowed for that to happen, right? So that this gap no longer existed, right? Yes.
If you think about the whole narrative that we talked before about like from the fall with Christ, the main theme is reconciliation. He's trying to bring us back to that condition that we've always intended to be. I think a lot of those are to teach trust, because trust is the basis of reconciliation. As long as they trusted him, then they were on the path to it. They were reconciled on the path to that ultimate reconciliation. And when they fell out of that trust is when everything went wrong.
Yeah. And it was a constant battle, wasn't it?
I mean, understand, trust me.
Yeah, it's true. And it's this constant, because again, we're, as a child, I'm going to keep using this example. When you're small, you don't know that fire can burn down a house, right? It just looks cool on a candle. You don't know this knife could actually cause you to die, right? It's just you watch everybody else use one, I want to use one, right? But as a parent, you're going to instruct them, and as they get older, you give them more and more access, right? Because now they understand the importance of it. But as people, we don't often understand what God's trying to tell us, right? So in those cases, all cases, we're obedient to him because we don't understand necessarily what he's protecting us about. Does that make sense? I mean, obedience says, look, if we follow him, and you said this earlier, trust, he's got our back. He knows what to do to keep us from falling in the ditch. Yes.
You know, they packaged all this stuff up and moved a number of times. And I just always wonder about when they're dismantling the tabernacle, and somebody's got to go into the holies of holies to get the little, you know, there's a little table in there too, and you know, some other few little things. That would be kind of scary to go in there and package everything up.
You had to follow it by the wall, right? Literally do every step that he told you. Again, this teaches seriousness, right? So to this point, do we approach God today that serious? Right?
Desiree told the story. I wasn't there, but she was walking down to the mailbox with Fletcher when he was little, and our at our house, the mailbox is down on the road at the end of our 8 mile long driveway. And the way our road works is it comes down a hill, and then there's a dip where you can't see the car, and it comes back up, and then it crosses in front of our driveway. And they had gone down, and she had crossed back. Fletcher was still on the other side of the road. Well, you told me.
Oh, we got a mic. Story time.
No, I was walking down the driveway with Evelyn and Fletcher, and Evelyn fell and hurt her knee, and I was tending to her. And then when I looked up, Fletcher was on the road on CC, and I heard a truck coming. And no, he was in the road on CC. And I heard a truck coming, and I was running to him, and I realized I wouldn't be able to get to him in time. And I told him, and I was afraid. I was afraid that if I called him to me, he would just walk right in the, you know, the lane that the truck would be in. So I told him to go back, go back. I was yelling at him to go back, and he slowly started walking backwards. And then I realized there was a culvert on the other side, and I told him when I thought he was safe, I told him stop. By that time, I was maybe I was probably 20 feet from CC, and the truck was passing, getting ready to pass. And the truck went right past him and hit the brakes because I guess he saw him as he was passing him. But if Fletcher hadn't listened to me, he would have died.
Yeah.
But that's a testimony to Andrew and Sophie's instruction to him to be obedient. But that's just an indication. It's a good illustration I've used in class when I teach the children that obey your parents in the Lord. And I told them it's the only commandment with a promise, the only one with a promise that you may live long on this earth. I said, and that's why.
Yeah. And if we obey, that's a good story. It's a very thankful one that he listened. I I don't think we take it serious enough. I think that's, I know I will speak for everybody in here, but I just know at points in my life I didn't take it serious enough. But he's deadly serious. Was it, what was the guy's name? The guy that touched the ark when they stumbled and it started to fall. You, was it Uriah? I didn't think that was right, but Uzzah, yes. I knew it started with a U, and it was like that. So for that moment when Uzzah did that, he didn't heed God's warning, right?
Well, they were heeding God's warning before that because they were on a car.
Agreed, but I'm just saying
that was the end of disobedience.
It looked like for that moment, totally with you, but for that moment it looked like he was doing a good deed, right? He's keeping the ark from falling, and he touched it and died. If you step off of a 1,000-foot cliff and you don't have a parachute, what's the likely outcome?
A lot of falling.
Yeah, a lot of double lunger is what I call it. You get plenty of time to scream certain times. But the problem is that law doesn't care. It doesn't care what you look like, anything. It doesn't care about your education. Gravity works. God's law works. And he's offered us a path out of that, and that's what this was teaching them as a tutor to guide them through it, even when they didn't understand. And this is all a type and a shadow for Jesus and the cross. And now we have all of these things repeated in the New Testament in a different form, right? But more important. So, to me, if you get nothing else out of this lesson, by the way, I wanted to get into Hebrews 9 and 10 because Hebrews actually kind of delves into what all this is and the type of the shadow and how Christ replaced it. So we don't get through that. Those are 2 chapters to read that kind of go with this. But this whole concept he used to train them as they went through the 40 years in the desert, to train them to obey him and what he expected. And they created habits and rituals, and then they got to go into the promised land. Part of our classes on formation is habits and rituals and things that we do in obedience to God that helps you see and discern things that are telling you to do something different than what he's commanded, right? That's really, at the end of the day, that's where we're headed with this thing. And so he's this constant through the entire Bible. I just find this fascinating. When we look at Eden, we can still see the remnants of Eden in this. There's even cherubim in here, right? Which is similar. It's not live angels, but it's a symbol of what was going on in Eden because it was blocked, right, from entry. And not anybody could go into this. Only one high priest. And that was pointing directly to a high priest that was coming in the order of Melchizedek, right? Who was a king and a priest. Which Jesus was also a king and a priest. Remember, because the kings and the priests get separated, 2 different lines. All right, so I know I've thrown a lot at you here. I'm going to pause for a second. Any questions about that? All right, so we covered the fire ahead of time. So that story is in Leviticus 6:12-13. It says, "The fire of the altar shall be kept burning on it. It shall not go out, but the priest shall burn wood on it every morning, and he shall lay out the burnt offering on it and offer up in smoke the fat portions of the peace offerings on it. Fire shall be kept burning continually on the altar. It is not to go out." Now, would you think that would keep a sense of urgency for the priest? How many of you have tended a fire? Okay. And have you ever had one of those little wood stoves that you have to feed it like every 2 hours or it goes out? Anybody ever experienced that? Yeah. We bought one. You didn't have to do that. But still, if you're at a campfire and you're trying to keep the campfire going, you got to stay with it, don't you? Because all of a sudden you wake up the next morning, you just got smoldering coals, right? Nothing left. So let me ask you a question. On the priest's part, do you think there was a sense of urgency to keep that fire going? Yeah, that's true. I don't know. The thing was, though, that caused them to think out of the box. I don't know that. It's a very good question, by the way. It had to think out of the box to keep that fire going, didn't they? Now, who are the priests today? Yeah, we are. You think this command still exists today? Not in the form of the altar, but do we have a fire that we're to keep going? Do you see the sense of urgency as a priest? You don't want the fire to die? You guys tracking on this?
Are you talking about the kind of fire like when a new Christian comes in and they're just pumped and you slowly see it go.
It can. Well, it can do that. But the thing is, that fire that's in us, we should keep it kindled, right? If we had the sense of urgency of the direct command not to let the fire go out no matter what, do you think this church building would be fuller than it is? Is that a word, fuller? Okay. What's that? That's right. I just made it up. Would it be, though? So can you start to see some of the principles that are in here in the Old Testament, just even surrounding how they worship, how they might still apply to us today, but in a different form? That God is teaching us something, even in the rules and laws that He gave the Israelites in the Old Testament. Does this make sense? To me, this is fascinating because Scripture is just telling us a story all the way from Eden, all the way to Eden restored in Revelation about God, and the whole thing ties together like some sort of tapestry. And you don't, as you're walking through and you look at individual pieces, you can't really see the picture, but when you step back, you can see it, right? And that's what this story does. But as you get into this, even these pieces points to Christ. It points to how we're supposed to operate in the church. It points to baptism. It points to the sacrifice, right? Sprinkling blood on the altar on the four horns of the four corners of the earth is like the Great Commission. Go into all the world, right? Tell them about Him because He's already paid for it all. Then you wash yourself. And then you have access to the temple, the Holy of Holies, through Christ. Make sense? Now, Lee brought up strange fire. So Aaron's sons did that. They brought in some strange fire. Why would God call it a strange fire? It's not what He told them. It wasn't His fire, right? Remember who lit that? They tried to replace it. How does that apply to us today? Can we bring a strange fire? What might that look like?
We choose to worship the way we want to instead of the way God wants it.
Or attributing the miracles and works of God to something else. Yeah. We can start to attribute the things that God does in our lives to a strange fire, can't we? Can't we give luck credit? You ever heard people say that? That's my luck? I don't believe in it. I don't think there's anything lucky at all, right? We still have choices, but God is busy working in everybody's life all the time, right? There's no luck. That creates randomness. And there isn't anything random about this at all. Go look at a snail. We were talking about these laws earlier. Have you ever noticed they got the same spiral pattern? Just go look at a conch shell at the ocean. Go look at a seashell. Go pull a snail out of your garden. They all have the same one. It's called the Golden Rule, 1.6. And it's everywhere. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. There's order everywhere. Even in all of his creatures, you can see it show up. It's a pattern, right? It's stamped on there by God himself. And we see this everywhere. We see all kinds of this. We look out into the universe, and even though it looks chaotic, guess what? Gravity and rotation, all those things create these beautiful galaxies. Order. If this Earth was just a bit further away from the sun or a bit closer, we would either be an ice ball or we would be burning in a boiling tea, right? And on top of that, we have such a strong magnetic core. I know you didn't come for a science class, but this is the beautiful part about God. He's got this giant ball of iron in the center of our Earth that creates this magnetic field that keeps the rays from the sun from hurting us. It's kind of like a veil. The sun is kind of like the sun is a sort of a type of shadow of who God is, right? It provides all the life on our planet, but we cannot stand in its rays unprotected. We need Christ. On Earth, we have to have an atmosphere, or we'd be dead. So to me, it's just like you see God through everything. So let's jump over to Hebrews. Let me jump on one other thing here. I did have something else here. We kind of been jumping around a little bit. So Hebrews 10 through 14, it says, "By this we will have been sanctified through the offering of the body of Jesus Christ once for all. Every priest stands daily, ministering and offering time after time the same sacrifices which can never take away sins." Now, I'm going to continue reading, but what he's pointing to, because he's talking to the Hebrews, is the priests that were doing all of this and what they were doing. But then what Christ meant to that. He says, "But he," talking about Christ, "having offered one sacrifice for sins for all time, sat down at the right hand of God, waiting from that time onward until his enemies be made a footstool for his feet. For by one offering he has perfected all time those who are sanctified." So the priests were having to offer sacrifices over and over and over and over. But Jesus is a once for all time. That's hard for my little pea brain to get, but you think about that. That means throughout all of time, no matter who lives before he comes back, he died for all their sins. All of them. There's not one sin that he didn't cover. The sins that are not going to be covered are those who choose not to obey Christ. Right? But he's already paid the debt. It'd be like you showing up to court owing you $1 million and you didn't have any money, but you got somebody sitting there going, "Hey, I'll pay this for you, but you got to give your life to me." That's what he's asking. Does that make sense? And I kind of covered this a little bit too about the mini Eden. All right, I think some of the rest of this we'll let go because I threw a lot at you. Any questions?
Do you think when they cast lots to replace Jesus, God affected the dice or whatever they were, or was that by chance? In reference to what conversation?
That's a good question. My opinion is that that's not chance. I think that's the whole point, is God weighs in on this, right? I think in his world, what they were doing is giving him permission to step in and help with the vote, right, so to speak. I don't know if anybody else has opinions on that, but I think God was heavily involved in that. I don't think there's anything like chance or with God at all. I don't believe in chance. Does that make sense? The God who takes down, when we go in and look inside of a cell, which we, by the way, until a few decades ago, never even knew it existed, you see the intricacies of everything that he's built. He leaves no stone unturned, and there's nothing that's accidental. I believe that. I think everything about him is purposeful, and I don't think there's any chance. If we make a choice against him, he already knew that we were going to do that. He already has a plan B. He already knew Christ was going to die on the cross before we were born, because he knew we were going to not choose well. This story is about God. At the end of the day, it took him to reconcile us back to him. We could never do it. That's the story. That's what it's about. So no chance. That's my opinion. I don't know if anybody else has got a different one, but any other questions? This gives Romans 1:20 a whole new meaning, right? Because he said you can see his character, evidence of him, and everything that he's made. At 1:20, yeah. And Psalms 19:1 says basically the same thing. Yeah. But they both say about the same thing. So God's saying, look, even if you've never read my word, look at what I created. I'm evident in everything. Not that he's in it. It's not pantheistic. It's just his creation there, and we can see his handiwork. And it's pretty clear. I mean, most people that are being honest with themselves realize that we had, they call it intelligent design. There was a designer, right? It didn't happen by chance. And by the way, for those who think that might be true, mathematically it is impossible. It's 10 to like the 34th power. Yeah, it's ridiculously big. So yeah, it's, if the shoe was on the other foot, they would be yelling at us. But yeah, there's no way. I'm completely convinced, and I didn't used to be. So that say something there. Anything else? All right. We can switch over to prayer requests.